Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you enjoyed the break. So we're back for another talk from Sydney. Thank you so much. Round of applause.
Mhm. Mhm. And hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm Sydney. I'm a first-year master's student, so bear with me. I'm not super used to presenting. But in my presentation today, Experiments as Models, Agents and Context in Biology, I talk about how experiments can be used as models and how they can play a similar, but in some ways importantly different role from abstract models because they're made up of complex living systems. We usually think that abstract models, like mathematical models, can contribute to theory in a way that experiments don't. But I argue that this isn't the case. So the presentation has two main parts. The first is describing the modeling view that I have, and the second is going through an example that illustrates that view. And so my experimental modeling view takes from Bas van Frassen's view on representational activity, Ronald Geary's view on theories, and Marcel Weber's view on experimental modeling. So first I'll highlight the relevant features of each of those views, and then I'll go through my own and what it takes from the different accounts. And for the second part, I'm going to go through an experiment performed by Will Radcliffe and Mike Travisano that investigates the transition from unicellularity to multicellularity. And then I'll discuss how we can see this experiment as an experimental model. But one of the main takeaways that I'm hoping for from this presentation is just that thinking about experiments as models, and in particular as models that involve living systems and intentional activity of experimenters, can help facilitate the exploration of biological possibility. And so I'll start with von Frassen's view of representational activity. Um, and in general, I take modeling to be a broad concept that involves prediction, manipulation, investigation, but especially representation. And I think that models are regularly used as representations of target systems. So von Frassen's view is very helpful for articulating how we can think about this representational activity. His view describes how we intentionally use things or depictions of things, how we intentionally use things as representations or depictions of other things. And representational activity always involves intentional action from an agent. And this activity is a relationship between a symbol, a user, and a thing in some context. And in the case of experimental modeling, generally the symbol will be the model, the user will be an agent or the experimenter, and the thing is the target system in some given context. So von Frassen's view takes both resemblances and non-resemblances between a representation and the thing that it depicts to be an important part of accurate representational activity. And often a representation, or a model in our case, that works well for some purpose isn't just something that very perfectly or closely mirrors its target system. It has important differences from the system as well. And those differences are highlighted intentionally to make the representation function well in a certain context. So a really simple example is a map of a subway system. It's meant to be used in a way that highlights certain resemblances between the map and the actual subway system, like the number of stops or the order of stops or the general areas that the train travels to. And we also have some salient non-resemblances between the map and the actual subway system. Like for example, the map isn't a reflection of the distance between the stops in the actual train system. Like in my map here, the sort of middle section is actually about 1 kilometer long, and the upper sections are about 20 kilometers, but it's all kind of reduced down. So a non-resemblance, but that's used for a certain purpose to help navigate. And so it's used for an accurate representation for a specific purpose in a context. And without these salient resemblances and non-resemblances, a map of the subway system would be effectively useless. And a subway map is effectively useless for trying to determine something like distances between stops. So highlighting these salient similarities and differences in a context are important for focusing in on what we're really interested in. So representational activity is always embedded or situated in a background of conventions, established meanings, symbols, communal understanding. And we generally don't use representations in isolation. The act of representing is almost always happens with a rich background of meaning. And as we'll see later, this is of course the case with experimental models as well. And the main takeaway from Van Frassen's view, for my purposes, is just that representational activity is made possible through the actions of an agent with an intention to use something to depict some other thing, and that the agent decides what the salient resemblances and non-resemblances between those things are. So Van Frassen provides a framing for a representational view of modeling, and Geary's view on theories can help characterize how those models are situated in relation to one another and in relation to the world and to theories. And on his view, theories are vague and indeterminate, but we can think about them as being made up of families of models and hypotheses that connect those models to the world. The models are partly characterized by statements of laws and principles, and their role in theorizing for Geary is to facilitate the connection between abstract laws and entities in the world. And the families of models that make up theories are interconnected through salient similarities and differences. Again, this view can help us understand how models are related to each other, and later it'll help explain how experimental models fit with abstract models. So we can move on to Weber's view, and he specifically looks at experimental models, and he focuses on their epistemic role. He wants to say that experimental models have a similar epistemic role to abstract models. And Weber's view, well, I think it misses some of the important activity involved in modeling. It provides a really good starting point for understanding how experimental and abstract models are related. And for Weber, experimental models are living systems that are stand-ins for biological processes that are generalizable to systems beyond the living system that's used as the model. And this is a feature that gives them this similar epistemic role to abstract models. And Weber thinks that if we look at these living systems that are constructed and made to be stand-ins for biological processes and interactions as models, then we'll start to realize that they aren't so different from abstract models. And he lists a number of similarities between them, like both abstract and experimental models are idealized systems with simplifying assumptions that are used to study other systems. They both have features that are determined based on background theoretical considerations. They're both used for investigating, making predictions, representing, making generalizations, and they both relate to a target system in a similar kind of way. And because of all these commonalities, he thinks experimental models play the similar epistemic role to abstract models. But Weber also thinks that they have important differences. For example, an experimental model can have a much more narrow scope and can capture a lot more details than a mathematical model can. And he thinks that experimental models can account for things that mathematical models can't because of how general they are, how general they can be. And the idea is just that sometimes having a perspective that is less general and more particular might be better suited to theorize about certain things, and it might be better suited to investigate certain biological possibilities. And so for my view of experimental modeling, I draw together relevant features from each of the three views I just went through in order to construct an intentional modeling view that I think can give a little bit more context to the role that experimental models play in theorizing. So Weber tells us that if experiments have the right kinds of features, they can be models that play a similar epistemic role to abstract models. And I think that while experimental models can play this similar epistemic role, I don't think that it's because of the particular features that they have. So taking from Van Frassen, experimental models can play this role because of how we use them. And unlike on Weber's view, on this view, it's the experimenters that provide the intentional activity that makes an experimental model and that gives it the kind of epistemic role that Weber has in mind. An experiment has to be used to model processes. And for an experiment to model processes that are generalizable to other systems, experimenters have to intentionally highlight the salient resemblances and non-resemblances between a model and its possible target systems. So an experimental model has no epistemic status on its own and is not a representation on its own. It has to stand in this relationship between agents, target systems, some background context. And like in the map example, how we choose to use something for certain purposes gives it this functional role. And this is the case for any kind of model. And similar to other models, experimental models require a lot of thoughtful consideration about how it's constructed, requires close observation and recognizing patterns and dynamics that are related to the goals of the model. And those observations have to be interpreted and contextualized. And it's all of this intentional activity, along with the kind of thing that serves as a model that makes something an experimental model. So, in general, like with Van Frossen's view, you could take anything to represent anything else. There's no real limit to what and how you could take something to depict or model something else. It depends on which features you highlight as salient resemblances and non-resemblances in some context. So a model, experimental or otherwise, doesn't have to fit within any set of boundaries. But of course, in practice, there are going to be a lot of factors that do actually constrain and limit what sorts of things are used as experimental models and what they're taken to model. For one, there are typically practical limitations like equipment available, funding, location, designing an experiment that could be replicable. And then it could be constrained by things like investigative interests, what the scope of those interests are, what the aims and goals of experimenters are, what the norms are within a given scientific community. And then, of course, there'll be tons of theoretical considerations as well. And so a model will be situated in a structured background of relevant theory and related models and experiments that add meaning and context to how the experimental model is used and how it's constructed. And with Geary's view of theories and models in mind, we can think about part of this background as a network of interrelated models that are connected through similarity relations and that taken together are part of theory more broadly. And we could think of the similarities not just as similarities in target systems or methodologies, but in their scope, in their aims and goals, the highlighted resemblances and non-resemblances. And both experimental and abstract models can play this role. So we can think of models in part as representations that are used for a lot of purposes by agents, and they're constrained by a wide variety of contextual factors that make them really, really useful for investigating biological dynamics. And as I've been going through the view, I've been noting that both experimental and abstract models play a lot of the same roles, and this is because of how they're used. But there's some important differences between them as well that we should care about. And because experimental models are made of living organisms, they don't make as many simplifying assumptions as abstract models. And because of this added complexity, it makes them better for investigating certain kinds of biological dynamics. Like they can make sense of things like what specific mechanisms make something possible, how fast a change can occur, or what the detailed relationship between entities is. And they're especially useful for investigating dynamics that we don't already have a comprehensive understanding of. Abstract models make simplifying assumptions that assume that certain complexities are irrelevant or unimportant for understanding a target system. But experimental models don't have to make as many of these assumptions. And if we don't know which details should be abstracted out, an experimental model is useful because it keeps those details in. And what I think is probably the most interesting part of an experimental model is that it can have this added element of open-endedness. Because we use living systems for these models, these systems can be given different levels of freedom to interact, develop, and evolve without direct intervention or control from experimenters. And this open-endedness can contribute to learning a lot about systems that we aren't familiar with or that we can't directly investigate. And we'll see in the multicellularity experiment by Ratcliffe and Travisano that it's something that investigates something that we can't directly investigate. So the multicellularity experiment involves using experimental evolution to try to better understand the multiple times that life transitioned from unicellular organisms to multicellular organisms. Because the most recent of these transitions happened like 200 million years ago, we can't investigate directly. So Ratcliffe and Travisano use an open-ended experimental system involving baker's yeast to try to learn more about the dynamics that might have been involved in this transition. So in this experiment, they took 10 populations of yeast that were clones from the same ancestor, and they propagated the yeast for 60 days. And after each day, there was a growth period, and then the yeast went through settling selection, which involves letting the yeast settle in a test tube, taking the stuff that's at the bottom out of it, putting it in a fresh medium, and letting it grow and then settle again. And all this does is select for the things that get to the bottom the fastest. It doesn't force the yeast to adapt in any particular way, or select the path of adaptation, or select for multicellularity directly. And so by the end of the experiment, all of the populations evolved multicellularity through the same mechanism, where cells stay together after splitting. And they form a multicellular cluster that looks a little bit like a snowflake. But at the beginning of the settling selection, the single cells increased in size rather than staying together after splitting. And there were a number of other ways that the yeast could have evolved, given that they were just selecting for mass and not screening for any particular phenotype, which is why we think of this system as open-ended. So in order to frame this experiment as an experimental model, I think it'll be helpful to highlight the symbol, the user, and the thing, or more specifically, what we take the model or experimental system to be, who's using it, what the target system is, and what the background constraints are. And it might be helpful to keep the subway example in mind, where we have the same relationship between the subway system, the map, and the person using the map. So the symbol in this case is the experimental system throughout the entirety of the experiment. Not only is it the physical stuff like the yeast, the medium, the test tubes, it also involves all of the dynamic changes that the system goes through. And so the system goes through settling selections, transfers, growth periods. There's unicells, there's multicells, there's populations of each at different times. There's novel adaptations, selection acting at different levels, interactions between the yeast. There's changes in fitness and survival and reproduction, and the list could kind of go on and on. The experimental system that's being used is incredibly complex, even though it does still make a lot of simplifying assumptions. And the experimental system isn't just used, but it's made by the experimenters. It was intentionally constructed by agents given their knowledge, practical limitations, goals, and purposes. And through observation of the dynamics and patterns in the system, the experimenters were able to learn about some of the evolutionary dynamics that might have been involved in the transition to multicellularity. They also chose the target system, which is this transition to multicellularity. They intentionally bring out the salient resemblances and non-resemblances between the model and the target system that shape how the experimental model is used to represent its target. And there are lots of non-resemblances, like the particular strain of yeast, the genetically identical population, the lab environment. But there's a lot of what they imagine are salient resemblances to the target system as well, like how the yeast responds to gravity, or that natural selection acts on the population, that there are changes in fitness landscapes, or that evolution resulted in greater complexity, even though it wasn't directly beneficial to the unicells. Many of these resemblances and non-resemblances are used to balance complexity and tractability, but many of them are also identified as the experiment progressed and developed. And these resemblances and non-resemblances taken together bring out the usefulness of the model in studying evolutionary dynamics that they're interested in. And then, of course, there's a complex background that the model is used within as well. And it's shaped by a number of considerations like natural selection or population genetics, multi-level selection, a number of other models as well. And it's also shaped by norms of the community. The multicellularity model itself is also already an established model within a network of models that are related through similarity. Being able to theorize experimentally in this way brings out the possibility of understanding things that abstract modeling doesn't always account for. Like that the adaptations or mechanisms required for developmental complexity can appear quickly through natural selection, or that just one phenotypic change can dramatically affect the evolutionary path of an organism. And the experimental model explores what's possible in a similar way to abstract models, but because of its added complexity and because it has this aspect of open-endedness, it can contribute to knowledge about evolutionary dynamics in a way that abstract models might not always be able to. And it's a way of exploring and learning about what's possible, and it's done through intentional activity of agents in an open-ended experimental system. So what I'm hoping the main takeaway from this presentation is, or what the main takeaways are, is that experimental models can play the same role as abstract models in theorizing because of how they're intentionally used and how they're taken to contribute to scientific knowledge broadly. But they also have a number of benefits, like the possibility of open-endedness, that make them especially useful for exploring lesser studied biological possibilities. And just as a final note, I'd like to thank the John Templeton Foundation for supporting this research. And I'd also like to give a special thank you to Ken Waters, Mike Travisano, and Larissa Wilkes. But thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much to Sydney. So we have a few minutes for questions now. If anybody has any questions for Sydney.
Oh. Didn't realize I was first.
For the camera.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't hear anything. First, great talk. That was super interesting. I was just curious. You mentioned the sort of resemblances and the non-resemblances. Similarity comes up a lot. And I was curious if you had thoughts on the sort of epistemic role that the non-resemblances play. Obviously, similarity can be useful because if you have two systems and you establish the right sort of similarity, you might be able to transfer information from the one you can manipulate to the one you're interested in. But I'm wondering if you think that the non-resemblances can also play some sort of, are they merely, I guess my question is, are they only limitations, or is there a role that they play that can be useful and interesting beyond just being limitations about what you can infer?
Yeah, I think that the non-resemblances play a really important role and probably a really important epistemic role. And I think that is sort of depending on what our goals are when we're modeling. Yeah, so if we, like in sort of the subway map example, if we have a goal of navigating, we really don't want there to be only resemblances. I mean, if we did, we would have just a replica of a subway system or something, which just wouldn't be useful. So I think making use of those non-resemblances and kind of intentionally bringing them into a model or a representation of any kind can be very epistemically useful and can contribute to, yeah, how we know and understand and navigate things. Yeah, I think.
Thank you very much for this presentation. And I think you're talking about the role of experimental model in theorizing. But I think one of the most important thing in theorizing is that the model should provide some kind of scientific understanding. So I'm thinking, what if intuitively, experimental models, they do exist, but what provide scientific understanding is eventually an abstract model. For example, to let everyone in this room to understand the evolution, I don't have to do the experiments just in front of the classroom. I just tell you my abstract model for this. And in this process, the role of experiment can be first an experiment to prove the causal relationship, and second, it might be a instantiation for that abstract model. So I'm just thinking about the role of what do you think about the scientific understanding in this?
Yeah, I think in general, abstract models are, I mean, extremely important and useful, especially for scientific understanding. And I think that often the role that experiments play in relation to abstract models is sort of this like confirmation of causal relationships or something like that. And for something that we have a lot of knowledge of, like a theory of evolution, it might be more useful to have an abstract or linguistic model. Yeah, especially in the case of like explaining it to a group or something like that. But I think there are a lot of cases, especially maybe more niche cases or more narrow contexts where using the experiment as a model can contribute to our understanding. And I think that's in large part because an experimental model doesn't have to make as many simplifying assumptions about the complexity of a system. So if there's cases where we don't have this like really, really clear understanding of which complexities can be abstracted out and which can't, I think the experimental model can play an important role there for understanding and generating knowledge, especially for future inquiries, etc.
Thank you.
Thanks. I really enjoyed the talk. I guess two quick questions. The first one is just kind of partly a suggestion, but also a question about if I'm sort of understanding the main sort of insight or takeaway of your talk. So one concept that I've come across in the last few years, which has really helped my understanding of what modeling is, which is a very sort of complicated thing, is the notion of surrogative reasoning. And this is the idea that when you're doing modeling, you take a thing to be a surrogate or a stand-in for something else. And then you investigate the thing, and based on your observations of the thing, you make inferences about the target. So is your insight, given that the surrogate is sometimes an experiment? It's sometimes, say, like a process that's observed, which then an agent takes as a stand-in for some target, be it, say, some transition to multicellularity and so on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that that's very interesting because we don't normally think about experiments themselves as possible sort of objects of surrogative reasoning, which is the defining feature of what it means to be a model. So I think that's very interesting. The second thing I wanted to ask was, at various points in your talk, you said that the things that are involved with modeling, be it that the symbol, the user, the thing, those seem essential. But you also mentioned all these other various contextual things, such as the interests of the modelers, the aim, maybe some background assumptions, community norms. Which of these, if any, do you think are sort of essential for modeling, or are some of them just sort of background conditions in which modeling takes place?
I think that's a hard question for me to answer. I think my sort of I guess intuition or immediate response is that I take them all to be, well, I want to say I take them all to be important. I think probably the sort of relationship between the symbol, user, and thing, or the model, the, let's say, experimenter and the target system, is probably the core of it. But I also think that sort of relationship doesn't happen without all of these background considerations. So, I think in theory, you could have those in isolation without the rest. It would just be an unusual case and it would probably be hard to come across something like that. So yeah, I'll say sort of the simple user thing is the core, but the rest I think almost always comes along with it.
Hey, thank you for the talk. This might be similar to the previous question, so if so, just let me know. But I was essentially wondering what the difference is in your account between cases where you just sort of naturally come across a system that provides a good model for another system. So let's say we observed multicellular life appear somewhere. That seems like a sort of clear-cut case of like, okay, this thing could be a good model of this other thing, right? But what you're talking about is specifically experiments where you've kind of brought about the thing that you're studying, right? So for your focus on experiments, is it just that you're identifying experiments is a case where you bring about that kind of situation, or is there something extra special about the fact that this is an experiment that's going on?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question to answer. I think that what I have in mind when talking about experiments in particular uh, is maybe something like uh, I don't know. These are cases where we have a lot of sort of control and thought that goes into them, and they can result in being these models for target systems. But I do think that you could naturally come across something as well, and that could be just as useful. But I guess I take it that with experiments and how much time it takes to think about them and construct them, that they're probably often more useful or a case that you would come across more than something naturally occurring. But I think both could work well in this role. Oh, does that answer?
So is it that the experiments are just kind of going to more reliably generate good model systems, or is there something additional about the fact that not only do we have a good model system, but we can also kind of manipulate it in a way that we may not otherwise be able to do?
Yeah, I think that I take it in theory that there could in some sense be no difference between the two, and it's not that they're experiments that makes them particularly interesting, but it's sort of the conditions around what happens in the experiment that make them interesting. But I don't think there's something like inherently more useful or interesting about them as experiments. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very clear talk and interesting and super well motivated. I had a question about the kind of features of experimental models. It was just very nicely laid out in the example given that it's a kind of living system. And in this case, one that's sort of different from another system that we're interested in getting information about evolutionary dynamics in an earlier time period. This seems nicely similar to other cases where living systems are used in a similar way, maybe often in analogy when we're using sort of animal models to get information about humans, of course. Um, Animal inoculation experiments and just animal models in general. I'm wondering if, in the way that you're thinking about experimental models, they're often sufficiently distinct from this like other system of interest, or if you want to include cases where maybe we're studying this living system and we're interested in that system or systems that are more closely like it, if you would count kind of both of those as experimental models.
I think this is something I've been thinking about a little bit. I think, on my view, I would include both of those things. I would say that, at least for my interests, an experimental system that's a little bit more distinct or different from its target system is maybe more of interest. But I do think that if we have a model organism and we're studying something that's like very, very similar to that model organism, that could also count, I guess, on this view broadly.
Perfect. Sounds great. And then just one more thing to maybe add. It also seems like it makes complete sense that scientists are going to use this sort of practice when they can't study that other system of interest, just like you laid out. Maybe it happened earlier in time, or for ethical reasons, it's inappropriate to sort of directly engage in perturbation experiments of the system. So captures a nice scientific methodology. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was super interesting. This is a kind of question which has just come to me and is pure instinct, so it might not make any sense to you. But okay, so when we're experimenting, we're making models on your account. When we're theorizing, we're also, making models. Do you think that there are things that scientists do which aren't sort of broadly speaking model making at all, or do you think that model making is kind of coextensive on your account with the practice of science as such?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. On my view, I do think that there are probably lots of things in scientific practice that wouldn't count as modeling. But I do think that any time that we have this sort of setup where we have this symbol user thing and this sort of intentionality of scientists or experimenters to, I guess, kind of compare these systems and figure out what the relationship between these systems are, that would count as like a modeling activity. But I do think that there's lots of scientific activity generally that probably wouldn't count. Well, I'm sure there's a gray area as well, some indeterminacy. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for your talk. It was really interesting. It reminded me a lot of Lorraine Daston and Peter Gallison's book on objectivity, where they talk about similar models in cartography that was akin to your subway system. Um, and they spend a lot of time talking about mechanical objectivity of like having an instrument that spits out data that we take as objective and that we can predict something that we're looking to find out on. And similarly, we talk about trained judgment as having scientists being able to do their experiments in a certain method that again allows them to have this prediction ability. And I was wondering to what extent kind of is objectivity in this project a characteristic that you're looking into?
Yeah, I think that's a question that I'm probably going to have to think a lot more about, and maybe we could chat about it in more detail later. But I think my first response is that I think there's maybe some level of objectivity in these experimental models or in abstract models in general. But I think, on my view, uh, objectivity plays a smaller role, maybe. I do think that something like predictive power is really important, but I'm not decided on what I think sort of relationship between that and objectivity is broadly. But I would love to chat about it more once I've thought about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great talk. I was wondering, what do you think about the degree to which we allow for on resemblance between what we call experimental model or like a life simulation of evolutionary dynamics and the actual evolutionary dynamics? Because it seems to me the way we are sorting out different cells in that evolution to multicellularity seems to be pretty much a little bit like we are not really uh, individuating or singling out the fitness value that is causing these guys to become multicellular. We are just like, I don't know, it's like a very crass way of sorting them out in a selective process. And one interesting question that we always ask about evolutionary processes is that what is the specific fitness value here? Can we actually numerically say, oh, the fitness value is increasing here? So how do you gauge that kind of a unresemblance, or do you think there is an unresemblance in that regard?
Yeah, I don't have an immediate answer to the question. I know in this experiment and similar experiments that were performed at the same lab, they some of them have these sort of like very empirical measures of fitness. Some of them are a little bit more qualitative. Um, that's not an answer to your question, but yeah, I'm gonna have to think about that. Thank you for the question, though.
I really appreciated your talk. It was really fun. And I guess as a scientist, I'm thinking about why we choose experimental models versus computational models or mathematical models. And as you were talking, it made me think that they each have different kinds of utility for how we reason about the problem that we're facing. And part of that has to do with the different constraints that experimental models have versus mathematical models. And as a scientist, I often don't know exactly what I'm trying to model. I go into the modeling endeavor with a vague understanding of what I'm trying to explain. But often I haven't realized all of the pieces of it or the constraints on the problem until I have chosen a model and started to exercise it. So in your scenario here, you're suggesting that experimental models have specific structure and utility. I think as a scientist, I feel like one of the kinds of utility that it has is offering a process by which I understand more about the constraints on the thing I actually want to be studying. And so I'm kind of wondering if you've thought about the utility to the scientist of choosing different kinds of models in the sort of reasoning that's possible based on the constraints. I don't know if that question makes sense.
I've certainly thought about it a little bit, and I do think that there are a lot of different ways that we might reason based on the kind of model that we choose. And I think why I find the experimental models so interesting, which is what you've mentioned, is that it seems like there's quite a learning process as you go through it, where you might have this idea of these initial constraints when you're deciding on a model or constructing an experimental model. But as you go through it, you can, learn about additional constraints, learn about additional features. I don't know if I have a very articulate way to say exactly how I think sort of reasoning plays in, or what exactly the differences are in reasoning between that and an abstract model. But it does feel like, in some sense, you have less preconception about what's possible from the beginning, and you're learning rather than setting all of the parameters initially in something like mathematical modeling.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed that a lot. And I just kind of wanted to follow up on the last question. So when you run an experiment, though, and you're developing your model, often in the experimental context, you encounter the need for certain constraints that may disrupt your ability to be able to say something about the target system. And so I'm wondering if you've thought about that, and if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases that probably does happen, where you have this sort of idea about what the constraints are going to be and how it's going to relate to the target system. And as you go through, you have to add additional things that sort of change what that relationship between the model and the target system is. And I think that, I guess, I'm trying to think of how to explain how that fits in with my view generally. I think it's totally compatible with the view, in the sense that these are new, maybe non-resemblances or dissimilarities that arise between the target system. But I take it that it would also be very difficult a lot of the time, as you're adding these constraints, to highlight what these similarities and differences are between the target system and your model. Um, hmm. Yeah,
No, I guess then I would just then the concern would be, am I only learning something about the experimental model and not about the target itself?
Right.
And so so that's all. But I mean, it's fine. It's just a question.
I do think that there probably are some cases where you end up learning less about the target system than you thought. Absolutely. Yeah. Ideally, you would learn about the target system. But yeah.
Thank you.
One last question, if it's gonna be quick. Yeah, thank you.
Great talk. It was very sympathetic. So, with your experimental models, with your view, the experimental models are related to other models through these similarity relations that was brought up over here. I just was curious. So, what are these similarity relations? Is it just going to be something like conventions within a community, or?
Yeah, I think that, the similarity relations that connect models to one another, probably like a wide range of things. Probably similarities in what their target system is, similarities in resemblances or non-resemblances between those models and their target systems. I think certainly also the conventions of a community that are used in the sort of modeling process. I think lots of other things, general aims and goals of the models. I think there's, a whole host of things that we can kind of include in these similarity relations to connect models together.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.